Good afternoon. Today is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Emergency Management Committee. I am Councilmember Blong Yang. I'm the chair of this committee. With me today are Council Members Reich, Palmisano, Gordon, and Quincy. And I believe the Council President will be joining us shortly if we don't finish this ahead of time. Today, and with us, we have 5 council members, so we have a quorum, so we can conduct the business of the committee. Today, we have 5 items. 4 of them are on consent, and the 5th item is for discussion. And I will read all of the items, and then we will approve the consent items before we move to the discussion item. So the first item is a Minnesota Board of Firefighter Training and Education Training reimbursement. The second item is a Minnesota GI Bill on-the-job training apprenticeship program employer payments. Third item is a joint powers agreement amendment with the Minnesota Homeland Security and Emergency Management for State Bomb Disposal Unit response. The fourth item is a contract with the Regents of the University of Minnesota Medical Center for the 2016 through 2017 veterinary services for police canines. And the 5th item is a discussion item, and it is a discussion item with regards to complaint filing experiences report of the Police Conduct Oversight Commission. And so council members, on items 1 through 4, the consent items, anyone want to pull anything out for discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the consent items, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, and we will move towards our discussion item. And the discussion item today is from the Department of Civil Rights, the Police Conduct Oversight Commission, and this is this was a report that came out, I want to say about roughly 2 months ago, that came through the SRIB, and it was a report that was done by the PCOC, and this is a complaint filing experience report of the PCOC. And with us today, we have representatives from PCOC, and we also have representatives from MPD. And so, Ms. Singleton, can you come up and introduce yourself, and then just go ahead with your presentation?
Yeah, so my name is Jenny Singleton. I'm the Vice Chair of the Police Conduct Oversight Commission, and thank you for having me here today. And if you don't mind, I'll pull up my presentation online real quick.
Okay, perfect. Councilmember Gordon.
I just wanted to note that civil rights staff, Amani Jafar and Ryan, I can't remember his last name now, would be here today. Patrick, thank you. Would be here today, as probably also would, I think Andrea Brown might also be gone because there's a national conference on police conduct oversight that they went to. But I appreciate Jennifer being here to be able to do this presentation for us today. I was hoping that would use up enough time to get the presentation ready.
You can keep on
viewers at home would be entertained. We also certainly shared the report with the police department as well. What I was hoping was to direct staff after the presentation to civil rights and the police to review the recommendations and report back to us sometime. I think in the RCA it says March 31st, 2017. But maybe they'll be ready to come back sooner. I know that Chris Arneson has reviewed the report already. That's about all I got.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. And I want to point out that Council President Johnson has joined us. And Ms. Singleton, go ahead.
All right, thank you. So as you mentioned or previewed, I'm here sharing with you the findings and the recommendations from the Commission's complaint filing process study. So we originally undertook this study for a couple of reasons. Number one, we had received anecdotal reports, including from one of our fellow commissioners, about people having a difficult time filing complaints at the precinct level. So we wanted to look into that further. And then also through some of the OJP, Office of Justice Program committees, there was discussion about how to make the process smoother and more user-friendly for folks so that they know how they can file and where they can file complaints. So with that, the goal of our study was to review, catalog, and recommend improvements for each mechanism by which someone can file a complaint. So we had 3 questions we wanted answered. The first was, what are the mechanisms that are currently in place? The second was to determine if someone uses each of those mechanisms, are they able to actually successfully file a complaint? And then finally, we wanted to recommend improvements that could be made to make the process smoother and simpler for people to use. So in answering that first question about what mechanisms are currently in place, it's first important to understand what actually constitutes a complaint. And a complaint has to be a signed writing. So for that reason, when folks call in, either to IA or to OPCR or to 311, that can't actually be a complaint since there's no signature attached. But it does certainly launch the process and continue on from there. There are 3 other methods. One is filing online through an online form that's available on the OPCR website. Second is to come here to City Hall and file either in Internal Affairs or in the OPCR office. And then finally, people can file at any of the 5 precincts in the city. So once we had identified each of those methods for filing a complaint, we actually had testers try to file a complaint using each of those methods. And then we had those testers document what they experienced and report back any challenges that they faced. So I'll go through each of the mechanisms and then give you an explanation of what the testers reported back to us and explain what recommendations we had for each of those mechanisms based on that feedback. So starting with calls or complaints that are called in, either to one of the offices or to 311. Obviously, the first hurdle is that can't be an official complaint since there's no signature involved. So that's something that the people on the other end of that call have to overcome to make sure the person is able to submit some type of a signed complaint. When we had our tester call 311, the operator was able to find the online form and then actually typed in each of the answers to the form as the tester was dictating their answers. We did find that the operator hadn't been trained in the OPCR process, so wasn't able to give any information about what might happen next, where the complaint exactly was routed to, and then also told the caller that certain information was required that isn't actually required. So that includes name and address. Complaints can be filed anonymously. And then also the operator said that the race of the caller was required, which is also absolutely not a requirement to file a complaint. When we had the tester call into the OPCR to make a complaint, we ran into the hurdle of getting the actual signed complaint, where OPCR will typically mail a complaint form to the caller, and then that caller could mail the form back. But OPCR has found that very few of those forms actually make it back to the office. It's just a slow and cumbersome process. So recommendations that the commission has based on that are obviously training for 311, just so the operators are familiar with the process and can have that information available to them to direct callers in the right place. In addition, we recommend having unique forms for 311 operators that have instructions for them about which fields might be required, might not be, and also instructions to make sure that the operator isn't coloring their answers with the operator's own inferences or assumptions about what happened. And then finally, we recommend having offsite complaint locations so that in the case that someone does, for example, call into the Office of Police Conduct Review, isn't comfortable filing online or mailing in a complaint form, the intake investigator at OPCR could direct them to a location that's closer to the caller in their neighborhood so that it's a little less burdensome and provides an additional option for the person to file a complaint. So moving on to that second mechanism, which is online complaints. We had our tester actually do a Google search of common phrases that you would use if you were trying to find out how do I file a complaint against a police officer in Minneapolis. And with most variations on that phrase or question, the top result was the Minneapolis Police Department page on the city website. And that did have information about how to file a complaint, but it only had information about the internal affairs process and not about OPCR. And then in addition, it had a downloadable PDF complaint form, but not a link to the online form that allows you to submit instantaneously. But I'm happy to report that that's already been fixed. That was a quick and easy fix. So the MPD's page now includes full information about both internal affairs and OPCR, and both a downloadable PDF as well as the online form. Our tester reported that once they did find the online form and then submit the form with the complaint, that they were a little confused because they're given very little information. If you click submit, it says, "Thank you, your form has been submitted." And there's no information about what might happen next. And as a commissioner, this is a trend that I've noticed over the last 3 years, is that a lot of times when we see complaints that come over the online form method, that person doesn't ever follow up. So what typically happens is that an online complaint comes in, and then the intake investigator would try to reach out to the complainant, either call them or mail them a letter or both. And a lot of times they just can never get a hold of the complainant, so they can never conduct that initial interview. And my hope is that if we provide more information, tell people to expect a call or expect a letter so that they can do the investigation into the complaint, that they'll be more receptive to following up with the intake investigator. And then the third thing to note about the online form mechanism is that it's really hard to find that form on the city website. If you just go to the Minneapolis homepage, you have to know that OPCR is housed within the Civil Rights Department. So you have to make it to the Civil Rights Department and then to OPCR and then find the online form. So that can be difficult for someone who doesn't understand, like I would assume most people don't quite understand the nuances of how the OPCR is structured in Minneapolis. So our recommendations to address those issues are to reformat the MPD page, which has already been implemented, to provide further information like I described after the person submits an online complaint. And then finally, a possible solution to addressing the difficulty of finding the online form is to create a complaint resource page. And this could be a page that aggregates information about different departments in the city, if people have feedback that they need to give about service they've received. And then there could be a direct link from the homepage to that page. I think there are a lot of different ways to resolve that problem, but I think it's important to make sure that it's much easier to find the online form. So that third mechanism I mentioned was coming down to City Hall to file either in the Internal Affairs Office or an OPCR. And the first thing that our tester noted was that the location can be a challenge to reach. So although downtown is obviously in the center of the city and is easily accessible by mass transit, if you're driving, it can be a challenge to get down here and park. And then also it can just be intimidating to come downtown. And the intimidation factor is the same for coming into a government building, and particularly if you are going to the Internal Affairs Office. It's housed next door to the MPD administrative offices. So both for civilians and for officers who are involved in the complaint process, that can be intimidating to walk by Chief Harteau's office while going to address a complaint of misconduct. Another factor that the tester noted was that the interview rooms lack privacy, both in terms of where they're located, and they're not soundproof. So if people are walking down outside the hall by the room while the person is being interviewed, there's a chance that people passing by can overhear them. And then specifically related to OPCR, because OPCR is housed within civil rights, it's hard to find the office. So if you go to the OPCR office and just look at the signage, it says Department of Civil Rights. So if you're looking for OPCR, it can be hard to know that you need to first go to the Department of Civil Rights, and then within that office suite, find the OPCR. So potential solutions that we've recommended are, again, that idea of getting the forms out to where people are actually living and working. So having forms with community partners. So for example, libraries would be a really good example of that, to have community partners have those forms available and have basic knowledge of what the process looks like. And then to have envelopes available for people so they can fill out their form, stick it in the envelope, and just mail it on. Similarly, we'd recommend having some off-site filing days where the intake investigator, again, goes out into communities and meets people where they are to take their complaints. And then related, we recommend having an off-site filing or off-site interview location or office. And this would be great, I think, for both civilians and for sworn officers, because it would be a place separate from police administration where they could go both for the initial interview to file complaints and then for ongoing interviews during the investigation. And I'll note that this is something that the OPCR is thinking about doing with the money that the mayor has proposed in the budget to improve the complaint filing experience. And then finally, that fourth mechanism for filing a complaint is to go into the precinct and file the complaint. So we had our testers do 3 test runs at each of the 5 precincts. And we found that only 2 of those testers were actually able to file a complaint at the precinct. And both of those successes were in the 4th precinct, I'll note. So they did a great job, and in one case actually cleared out a desk and allowed the person to fill out the complaint, and then it arrived at the intake investigator's desk the next morning. At the other 13 instances, officers gave the testers inaccurate or incomplete information. So many of the officers told testers that they needed to go to a different precinct to file. They said that you needed to file your complaint in the precinct where the incident happened. So this led the testers to be running all over town trying to file their complaint. Other officers incorrectly told testers that MPD doesn't do paper complaint forms anymore. And some of those officers did find the online form and then print it out for the person. And then other officers just weren't willing to take the complaints. We had one officer who the tester said seemed well-intentioned, but just said that he felt it would be awkward for him to take the complaint. One other officer just walked away when the person was asking about how to file the complaint. So in that case, another officer did come up and help the person, but there were inconsistent responses from officers, and officers weren't always willing to help. So the recommendations we have to address issues with filing at the precinct are, first of all, just to have training for all officers and make sure that they actually know what the process is, know that there are various ways you can file a complaint, and can have that information available to provide to people. So the OPCR with Internal Affairs has already started planning and has set dates for training for, I believe, sergeants and above that will be complete by mid-November. So I think that that's a great first step to make sure that officers at least have that information. The second recommendation is to make sure that there is a complaint filing station at every precinct. So this is a very, very low-tech solution of just having a table, having the complaint form, which is translated into the 5 most commonly spoken languages in Minneapolis, having all of those forms available with pens and with envelopes, so that anyone who goes into a precinct can go to that table, fill out a complaint, put it on in the envelope, and put it in the mail. And then finally, our final recommendation in regard to that is just once there are those filing stations set up, to have continued visits to the precinct to make sure that those tables are still out and that the forms are are still available for people to have. So we, as Chair Yang, you mentioned, we released this study at the beginning of last month in August. And since then, there's been a lot of progress made, I think, and both internal affairs and OPCR have been very receptive to the issues that we reported in the study, and have been working and set up meetings to work together to address a lot of these issues. And we have Commanders Granger and Case here if you have any questions specifically for them about the work that they're doing. But there's already training put in place, work on the websites is being done, and then one other specific planned activity that I want to mention is creating a card that would be similar to the blue card that you get if you are involved in a crime that has your case information. And this would be a yellow card that would have information about each of the ways to file a complaint, and that would also have the officer who's carrying the card, their name and badge number, so that there could be some accountability if that officer were to give someone a hard time when they gave them the card. So I think there's good progress being made, and hopefully we'll have more to report in the near future. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Ms. Singleton, thank you. First question before I open it up to my colleagues here. When you talked about the testers going to the precincts and trying to file a complaint, and then you said, there were officers that maybe, weren't receptive, weren't helpful, were helpful, or any of that stuff. Who were these officers? In terms of, were they the frontline officers that were at the reception desk? Were they sergeants? Who were they?
They were the desk officers at each of the precinct, which my understanding is that that's a rotating position.
Okay. Councilmember Gordon?
So was there one precinct that stood out as doing a better job than the others?
There was the 4th precinct. Definitely did a great job.
And I also was curious about how many complaints do we think are filed on a regular basis? I'll just tell you, this came up a little bit when I was talking to a librarian or talking to community partners and about possibly having a place where people could file complaints there. One of the reactions I got right away was, well, how much time is this going to take from my other responsibilities?
Mm.
My impression is there probably isn't a steady line of people making complaints. It's probably trickles in, one day none, and another day maybe a couple. But what's your understanding about the number of complaints that people are trying to file?
Yeah, I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. Do you know those numbers?
Sir, I don't have the numbers with me, but it'd be easy enough for me to get. I would say it's right now at this point, it's in excess of 150 complaints that we've received this year so far, and they come in a variety of different ways. I would say the vast majority of the complaints now are online.
Appreciate that. And I'm also curious about if there are certain recommendations that seem harder to implement, or that there's some concern about we're hearing from the department in terms of the list of recommendations. And I don't know if the department, maybe you guys can tell me if it has had an opportunity to review the recommendations and look at, obviously some were so easy we've already implemented them. The website actually looks much better today than it did when the report came out. Are there other ones that you're thinking about implementing in the near future, and some that maybe not?
Yes, sir. And my apologies. I'm Commander Case, so I am the commander of Internal Affairs Division for those who aren't familiar with me. But we've had an opportunity to explore all the recommendations at this point, and we've had great conversations with OPCR and also with the commission. So there's a few that we're trying to navigate through related to the website. There's some technical difficulties that we're working through. Commander Granger is also here, who I've been working with to try to establish what that's going to look like moving forward. We have 2 websites that we use, our Inside MPD website and then the traditional City of Minneapolis website. The one that we operate, the Inside MPD, is much easier to manipulate the data than the city website is to manipulate that data. So, but yeah, most of the, in fact, all of the recommendations, I think, are something that we've taken with a very serious tone and have moved forward on all of them. Some of them will be able to, I think, see a more quick response as far as being implemented, as opposed to some that require some technical work and or pilot maybe projects with some of the steps that we're thinking about doing, such as, I don't know if we talked about the notification form at all. One of the steps that we're looking at doing is linking complaints back through the supervisor. So currently, our mechanism doesn't necessarily dictate that officers have to report a complaint to a supervisor. It's just more you need to know how to process a complaint. So one of the things we're looking at doing is having a step of accountability is to ensure that if a complaint comes in, the supervisor is notified. And part of that discussion is how do we ensure that gets done? Is it verbal? Is it email? Is there a certain form that we use? If it is a form, how do we make that something that's simple but yet trackable? So some discussions there that were still ongoing. But the biggest improvements right now are the yellow card, which the commissioner talked about, and then also the training that we have planned for October and November.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. The first is for Ms. Singleton. Ms. Singleton, who conducted these attempts, the 15 attempts? Were they like commissioners going out?
It was
pretending to be
not
other people,
commissioners. We had city staff who are attorneys conduct the tests.
Okay, thank you. And those were 15 tests that were just they were faux tests, right? They weren't like actual. You say they were city attorneys, so I assume that this was just
Yeah.
like.
And I'll clarify, not from the
audit.
city attorney's office,
Oh, okay.
but other attorneys who are employed by the city.
I see.
But they did go to the precinct with a defined script. We had 3 scenarios that were based on common complaints that come through, and then just say, I want to file a complaint. This is my experience of what happened. How can I do that?
Thank you. I get that we are just receiving this today, and that means council-wise it doesn't go anywhere from here. So where do your recommendations go from here? I assume they went to Commander Case in Internal Affairs. Is that the general process of something coming out of PCOC like this?
That is, generally we'll forward our complaint or our studies directly to Chief Harteau. Commander Case and Commander Granger are both pretty tuned into what's going on with the commission. So they're generally aware of the studies as they're in progress, and then they'll also receive the recommendations. But we, of course, always try to come to the Public Safety Committee because I think that the City Council also has an important role in all of this.
And then my last question is, how will it be tracked? How will PCOC publish how many of these recommendations get implemented, or is this due back in some sort of report from Commander Case to the chief?
Well, Commander Case and Director Jafar both came to our commission meeting this month in September to report back on their initial progress. And then we're also planning to have 6-month after action reports that will probably begin with this study, where 6 months from the time when we forward recommendations onto the chief for every study, we'll ask that there's a report back on what the progress is for recommendations and any explanations for why any recommendations weren't implemented.
Thank you.
Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a curiosity, when would someone get a yellow card? If are we going to give a yellow card to everybody, or what's going to happen?
It would be if someone was inquiring about filing a complaint.
Okay.
So a while back, I did a ride along with an officer, and it was bar closed in downtown on a Friday night, and it was the night of the sound bar shooting. And just as an example, he had someone who was very, very intoxicated, flag him down and then want to file a complaint, and was, so this person I was with was in charge of coordinating bar close while, half of MPD was down at sound bar. And so he wasn't able to actually sit down with the person right there and have him fill out a complaint, and asked him to go to the precinct and wait half an hour, but the person was unwilling to do that. So I think that's the perfect example of a situation where that would benefit both the civilian and the officer.
Great. The other just kind of remark assessment, when you talked about having OPCR is probably not the only place in the city that people need to have direction. We hear this about human resources, when someone files a job application online and then they don't hear anything more. And so I take that really seriously, and we could do a better job across the enterprise on that. And people are looking for feedback. They want to know where they are in the system and what's the next step, what happens. So that's a good criticism, I want to say, for us across the board.
Councilmember Gordon.
Um, on a couple things, and on that, I do think there are systems and companies, and you'll go online and you'll do things and you'll fill out your application, and then you'll actually get an email back if you give them an email, and they'll give you information about, we've received this. If you want to follow up, it's going to be assigned to an investigator, and you can call this number to find out. Or maybe even they have a case number already automatically issued to it. So I think that would be probably complicated and challenging, especially given our system, but something that we could potentially do. I was also curious about if there were plans. Well, maybe I'll just say it this way. An interesting thing for us to do might be to do this again in a year and see what difference we've made. Because I think it's a very useful exercise. I know that only 15, it's a very small sample. I don't want to blow it out of proportion or anything, but it was interesting to get the results. And so then if we try to make some improvements and then we do it again, it would be great to see how effective they were. Maybe the sample could be a little bit bigger. I also just wanted to note to my colleagues up here that my intention was to move a staff direction. If you go online and open the RCA, it's on there, to have a more formal report back and a recap. It could even come after that 6-month period. I think I put on the staff direction March 31st, just knowing how much staff appreciates having ample amount of time to come back. But I thought that would give a lot of time to implement, especially some of these harder to do efforts, and especially if we are going to work on community partners or setting up the little station at every precinct, or those kinds of things. So that's where I was expecting maybe it would come back and touch the council again, and maybe it could come after you get your after action report or whatever you do. So I'll move that when we're done talking.
Okay. Any other questions? I have a few questions. So, Ms. Singleton, your presentation isn't on the links, and I'd encourage you to share that with us, and I would do that with the clerk so that it can be linked. I do have to say I appreciated the presentation not being our PowerPoint presentation. I mean, no offense to PowerPoint presentations, but it's good to see this variety here, so thank you for doing that.
And I have to give credit to the legal analyst, Ryan Patrick, who actually made the bones of this presentation and allowed me to borrow it.
Okay.
So.
So I'm just going to ask a few questions here and there about different things, but this idea of offsite centers to do applications. I mean, when the volume of applications is, let's say, one a day for the entire year, let's say, using Commander Case's numbers, I mean, 150 up to this point, I mean, we can probably guess, I mean, probably one a day at most. I'm just wondering, I mean, how that justifies, an outlay of money to, let's say, rent sites or do anything like that. And so, I mean, that's kind of my first point. But, the other thing that I wanted to mention was just that, I truly appreciate the piece about our facilities not being very friendly, and such as going to IA and just that sort of environment not being so friendly. And, I'm wondering, I mean, where are we in terms of fixing that, or are we anywhere close to that? And maybe that's probably the appropriate question for Commander Case.
Yes, so I can address both. The first point about, as far as dedicating money to an offsite, I think if you look beyond just the complaint filing process and look at it in terms of using it for an interview location, that would be something that would definitely see used more frequently than just say once a day. So I think the theory would be it would be an expanded purpose facility, not just for filing the complaint. And then on the second part, as far as the location and the facilities, I would say we're nowhere even near first steps on that because it revolves around money, quite honestly. And so where we're structured, IA has been there for years, and we've been in that location, and it's been a long conversation about, is this the best place to house this type of a unit? And really, it comes down to how much does it cost us to move that type of an operation outside of those walls. So very preliminary as far as where we'd go on next steps.
Okay. And my next question, and I don't mean this to be controversial, but
Mhm.
I've heard complaints before about how constituents or residents go to the different precincts, and how in terms of the first person they see at the precinct, I mean, maybe they're not so nice, or the customer service isn't all that great. And I mean, is MPD looking into that in terms of, let's say, maybe putting our best foot forward, and, having, folks who are trained in terms of customer service, so that, anybody who interacts with the MPD at the precinct level, they're getting, really great customer service.
So, no, it's a great point, and we are. Chief Harteau, as soon as the study came out, she directed Commander Granger and myself to immediately start coming up with the plan. And one of the things we looked at was the success in 4th Precinct. Like, why was that, right? And so I think when you look at a study, even though it was a small sampling, you look at the positive, and the positive in 4th Precinct is they were engaged in that person when they came in, something that the officers in the 4th Precinct, and quite honestly around the city, do frequently. Just so happens the officers that were present during that part of the study, um, they hit all the right points. So, we're definitely looking at how we staff that desk operations. It is a rotating shift, so it's not something generally that the same officer is going to be assigned day in, day out. So there's pros and cons to doing that. First steps for education is the training coming up in October and November for all supervisors. Our supervisors are the ones that pick and are generally assign the people or the officers to the desk. So maybe giving some tips or best practices of when you do assign somebody to the desk for that night, friendly reminders of things to do, which will include this, this, and this. One of those would be, if a complaint comes in, ensure that your customer service face is on. And, there may be some discussion about if customer service is the right term to use. I believe that it is, because we're the face of the MPD when that person has that first experience or a multiple experience with the department. So what we're trying to capture is that if somebody comes in and has had a negative experience with the department, we at least want them to leave with a better experience moving forward. And I'm personally involved in the training, so that message I can say with a high degree of confidence will be relayed to all the supervisors, and then the plan would be to address the entire department at some point in 2017 or 2018.
Commander Case, when you talked about getting to the precinct at the right time, and maybe getting the right officers to provide, let's say, world-class customer service at that time. I mean, imagine if, let's say, any of the testers were to go at a different time at the same precincts. I mean, I guess for me, I mean, at where I'm at, I mean, I'd like to think that, anytime you go to a precinct, MPD, I mean, you're going to get the same level of service. I mean, in terms of, just getting helpful officers who are going to help with complaints or anything else. And, I guess, I mean, for me, I mean, I think that's the part that, we have to strive for, is that sort of consistent service all the way through any hour of the day, right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree, sir. Absolutely. And that, I think, is what the ultimate goal would be. In fact, when I was giving the presentation to the PCOC this past month, one of the commissioners mentioned, he says, well, I'm sure we're always going to have somebody that will just, in essence, push somebody aside. And my response was, I hope that we get to the point where that's not our expectation or even something we fall back on. We want to make sure that everybody who does have an interaction with the department, especially in those times where they've already had a bad experience for whatever reason, can come away having at least a consistent experience moving forward, that at least they're informed properly with what the next steps are going to be.
All right. Well, thank you. Councilmember Gordon, why don't you make your motion?
I'd just like to move to direct staff from the Civil Rights Department, Office of Police Conduct Review, to work with the Police Department staff to review the Commission's recommendations and report back to our committee on process improvements by March 31st, 2017.
All right. Anyone have anything to say? Any discussion on that motion? All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And with that, I have one last motion to make, and that's just a motion to receive and file this report from the PCOC. Any discussion on that? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And with that, we are done with our business for today, and so we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.